it started out normally, as you would expect from something that is similar to THC, just a regular kind of high or cruise. That kind of then escalated at some point really quickly. And to me, that was really scary because I have never remotely felt anything similar to that. And I was just sitting there and I was thinking, I'm not going to be okay. Like, like I don't know if I'm going to make it. I think I'm going to die. I think this is it. But the number one thing that freaked me was the waking up to the visual symptoms, because these never disappeared. And I would always just keep checking in on like every morning I would wake up and be like, oh my God, is it still there? Yes, it's still there. Oh my God. I'm stuck in this forever. And I thought I had some form of mental illness that I need to now work on for years and years, and I messed up my whole future because of this. And you can 100% get normal. I am absolutely certain now that I've experienced it myself. Getting back to normal is 100% normal. So it is even better, honestly.
Hey everyone, I'm Sean O'Connor, author of the Depersonalization Manual, and today I'm speaking with Glen Baltensberger, based in Switzerland. Glen is 23 years old. In 2024, he developed Depersonalization Disorder after eating a synthetic cannabinoid edible. His symptoms included visual symptoms like static and fizzy vision, brain fog, the feeling that there was a filter between his mind and reality, anxious overwhelm, and chronic exhaustion. Glen suffered with the condition and these symptoms for about 6 months. But fortunately, Glen has since made a complete recovery. As he wrote to me in a recent email, quote, I want to thank you for your work on the book and uploading all the stories of people going through the same thing. It really helped me kickstart my recovery and to get through this. I can say now that I have fully recovered and I'm so grateful. I would love to share my recovery story. End quote. And Glen is with us today to talk about his experience with and recovery from Derealization Disorder. Glen, you're very welcome to the channel. Thanks for being with us today.
Hi, Sean. Thank you for having me. I've been waiting for this moment, actually. I remember back when I first had it and when I found your videos, this was like the one thing that I like really latched onto, and I had this kind of idea in my head. I was like, I know I'm gonna make it, and I know, and I'm gonna tell my story about it. This was like driving me. So really, really excited to be here, and thanks for having me.
Nice. That's great. Well, I'm glad it was a source of motivation, and it's a pleasure to have you on the channel, man. Thank you for being with us. Glen, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So as Sean already said, I'm 23. I'm a student. I actually study biomedicine right now. Still in my undergrad program. I do weightlifting a lot as my preferred hobby. I work out a lot. I've started that a while back, and I'm a pretty open person. Very, I'll probably get to this later on in the interview, but also very like a head person. So think a lot about everything and anything really. Right now, I just came back from England from a long hiatus of being back here in Switzerland. And this has also been good for me to just have this different view. I was really nervous about this because going away obviously was going to be a big thing in my head if I was not feeling well. But everything went well, so really happy about that and feeling okay at the moment.
That's great to hear. Yeah, it was definitely a thing for me as well. Was going traveling again after I recovered, and I had panic attacks on a plane, which really scared me. So I kind of thought I don't think I would ever be able to travel again. So once I got to do that, it was very exciting. It kind of opened the world back up to me, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really cool about studying biomedicine, Glen. Is there a particular aspect of that you want to pursue as a career?
Yeah, so I'm very interested in neuroscience, kind of the cutover of like behavioral science as well as like the biology behind it. But I also really do like genetics, so I don't really know where exactly it's going to take me for now, but I have a fascination for how the human body works, and there's so much that we don't know about it, which is what excites me, which is also why I love science and discovering new things. This was also exciting to me. Like in retrospect, might not have felt that way during it, um, but thinking about like all of this and how it works really kind of excites me.
Yeah, it is. This is the thing, is that when you're going through it, it is it's the most terrifying thing in the world. But once you're through it and you look back on it from a practical perspective, it's actually fascinating. It's really, really an interesting thing just to see how the body and the brain react and kind of go into this
Yeah,
high alert mode. And I'll be particularly interested. I know people watching this interview will be particularly interested to get the perspective of somebody who's actually studying biomedicine and is interested in neurobiology, who has gone through an experience like DPDR themselves. So with that in mind, Glenn, can you tell us a bit about how all this started for you? What were the events that led up to it?
yeah. So I went on a trip to Budapest. I was traveling with my friends. This was I think around April last year, and um, we had a good time up until that point. We're just going about our trip, and then this was a thing in Budapest. These synthetic cannabinoids, and I had never had that before in my life. So I have had experience with THC, uh, but not synthetic one. So I've never been a big like consumer or enjoyer, but I've had it every now and then. And the the synthetic edible, that was a completely different thing. Now we didn't really know like think too much about it because it was so over the counter and it was such a thing there. So we just kind of went for it, and it actually started out like so that one night, now all of us kind of had that, and it started out normally, I would say, just as you would expect from something that is similar to THC. Um, just a regular kind of high or cruise or whatever. And that kind of then escalated at some point really quickly. And to me, that was really scary because I have never remotely felt anything similar to that. Um, I am usually like an anxious person, but I've never I actually identified that as such. Like I've never been aware of it to that extent. Um, like I know that I tend to panic about like something going wrong or worry about the outcome of something, and like I know I'm a person like that, but I've never felt it actually happening when something reacts in my body like that. So um, the way it happened was, I think in hindsight, it actually was that like kind of a panic attack because for hours I was just basically sitting there. I was going back to the hotel room and I was just sitting there and I was thinking, I'm not going to be okay. Like, like I don't know if I'm going to make it. I think I'm going to die. I think this is it. Obviously, physically, like my friend tried to call me and he was there. He was like saying like, no, you're going to be fine. Like, like nothing's going to happen. But I didn't know. And also the aspect of being in this place, like in Budapest, not at home, not knowing exactly what it was. Like obviously it was got this over the counter and it was this packaged edible, but it, like I don't know. You start overthinking about what it could have been. You start worrying about the worst case scenario. You think, oh my God, like what if what if this is it? What if I'm just gonna have a heart attack because my heart was pounding? What if I'm gonna what if I'm not gonna be normal again? And I was just have this racing thoughts, and it would be this really aggressive feeling. It was actually that was probably the worst 30 hours. It was very long. Also, it was like 30 hours uh of my of my life because That just felt really draining. And the worst part about it was, and I will get to this later, it was the visual, because normally there are some visual symptoms associated with a drug like that, but it was to the point where I couldn't even like see, because everything was so overwhelming. If I could describe it, it was just an overstimulation on every front, like in my head, my visual, my auditory, just my body. I couldn't move properly. I was just paralyzed in this panic state. And then at some point it was like, okay, we'll just try to sleep. It will all be good. The next day we'll sleep, and it usually always saves itself that way. And then we did that, and then it was kind of alarming the next day because, as I said, like 30 hours went past. I've slept the whole day, woken up, and I remember I was like, I feel better, but I still have these visual symptoms. Something feels weird, something feels off. I still feel kind of like I'm on something. Maybe it's just really strong. Maybe it will just take a while. And I would keep, like at that point, it would be okay because I still had my friends around me, and we still had a bit of this trip going. So we just explored Budapest, tried to go about our days in a normal fashion. And like as the days went on, the symptoms didn't really decline, and it did for the others. It didn't for me, which is when I thought, okay, maybe something in my brain just like switched. Maybe I'm having consequences that I can't reverse anymore. That was really scary. I was really freaked because for the first time it was something like in my brain, and I I immediately thought, oh my God, I have brain damage. And I know you've been talking about this to a lot of people thinking this, but at that point I had no idea what this was. Like I thought I was still under the influence even the days after. But as long as I was there, I was trying to just keep it together and just hope till I'm home, settle in, sleep, and everything is gonna get like cure its way. But then I think like a week after, when I finally got home and actually slept properly in my bed, got some rest, tried to just go about my day, I really couldn't. I couldn't go back to anything remotely normal. I would wake up every morning in this first week. So like 5 days after the trip, the week at home, I would say that was the worst or the hardest period of this the depersonalization, because for one, I didn't know what it was, and I think that freaks one the most because you start thinking of all the possibilities it could be. And I would try to take these anti-stress like homeopathic things to just calm me down, because I noticed I was really like nervous and anxious all the time. But the number one thing that freaked me was the waking up to the visual symptoms, because these never disappeared. And I'm a very like visual person, and I would always just keep checking in on like every morning I would wake up and be like, oh my God, is it still there? Yes, it's still there. Oh my God. I'm stuck in this forever. And it also didn't help that at that time I did Google a bit about it, and then I went over some Reddit stories, which was the worst idea in hindsight, especially if you read one that goes like, "Oh, I've been stuck in this for 20 years. I've had this, it never went away. I've had this trip, done that," and I just had to stop. I had to stop looking at that because it was already bad enough to begin with. But the Googling part actually then led me to your channel, which at the beginning I was still unsure if I had the same thing. Like I was already looking at like watching your videos, and I would get some relief from that because it sounded similar, but a part of my brain would go like, yeah, but mine's different. My like like I have this unique disease that I kind of just flipped the switch in my brain, and I'm broken like that. So it did take some time until I just was able to trust, like, okay, I think this is the same thing. And yeah, I think at that time it was just really hard to even do simple things. Like I would lose items way more often. I would just walk around and not be present at all, just worrying, constantly worrying, and not being able to enjoy anything. Food was very hard to eat for me at the beginning. I'm a very big foodie, but at that point, I couldn't eat at all because I just had this clump in my stomach of anxiety. And yeah, I think that was kind of how it all started. And then after, oh, I also went to the doctor because I started doubting it so much that that something was wrong with me, that I actually did go to the doctor's office. I kind of suspected that I'm not going to find anything because I've heard already from your channel and online that like usually nothing ever comes out. But I was scared that I'm going to have a stroke or yeah, something along those lines. So they tested that. Nothing seemed wrong. I also had like I was scared of having like the condition with the eye where it always redirects its focus, and that was associated sometimes with different mental diseases. So I was scared that something happened there, but it was all just me blowing up and trying to find for a solution because I was just stuck in this state of trying to figure out what was wrong with me, which then disabled me to do anything else, really. So I think that was like the first 1.5 weeks, and those were by far the hardest.
Yeah,
And yeah, and then I decided to take the step and actually invest in your book. And I think from there it slowly started to get better.
that's great. That's great. Um, yeah, it's such a scary experience when you're going through it first. And I had a similar experience in that I was in a different country with my friends as well. I was in Amsterdam and smoked weed that was way stronger than I thought. But yeah, and just about the so because I know people have had experiences with synthetic cannabinoids before, so uh it's it's different. It's so as my understanding, Glenn, is that it's different from normal cannabis in that it's created in a lab synthetically, and it's like it's sprayed or
Yeah.
mixed into the edible, but the effects can be a bit more unpredictable than normal cannabis. They can sometimes just be a lot more intense.
Yeah.
And as you said, I mean, the initial experience lasted for 30 hours. You know, which is that's a long time.
That's a very long time. Yeah.
That's a
So
long time.
um yeah, we figured this out in hindsight because we probably should have looked at this beforehand, but um it actually, like, it was THC-P. So just disclaimer for anyone to try THC-P, be very careful with it. It can be, studies show that it can be up to over 30 times stronger than normal cannabis, which that already is crazy. Like,
Yes.
and it also feels completely different because um, you almost notice how it's synthetic in the way it works on your body. If I had to describe it, it would be really like the really aggressive older brother of like cannabis, and instead of being relaxed, it kind of just goes after you and just explodes in your whole body. And obviously, it also has to do with how much you take of it. So you shouldn't take too much of it. We obviously didn't, like, we did take a large portion, like in retrospect, but it didn't seem to be that much. Especially also what the guy over the counter said would be a normal portion because it was in these gummy bears, and we and one gummy bear is already like a 5x dosage apparently. So Yeah, very hard to deal with these synthetic ones. I wouldn't like, especially if you have no experience or if you're not used to it at all. I think synthetic cannabis is just very unpredictable, like you said, and also like quite dangerous, frankly. Like if nobody knows what exactly is going to come out of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean that. I mean, when you've taken too much weed and just normal weed, or if you had an edible that's too strong, it's incredibly overwhelming. Um, so when that is multiplied out by a factor of 10, 20, 30, yeah, it's just terrifying. And I had a similar experience as well. Again, where I kind of got into my head that like what had been given to me over the counter. I remember thinking to myself like it has to be something else. Like I mean,
yeah,
I don't know what they gave me. I think this. I thought I got into my head that they must have like dipped us in LSD. They must have dipped it in acid, because I was like, there's no way I'm this high from a joint. Like this has to be something else, which terrified me. But then my friend who was with me was saying like, Sean, it's not acid intake. You're okay. I mean, he was having a fairly intense time as well, but he was fine. How did your friends get on with this?
yeah.
Was it?
So it was very well, some of my friends just it was very overwhelming, so they just kind of switched off type thing.
Mm,
But so the one friend that was with me in the hotel at the time, he actually, it was very overwhelming for him too, and he has a very high tolerance to anything, but he was also fine, like, and that made sense because he like also now, like if I think about it, as a person, he's always this very everything's gonna be fine type of mindset, and like he would never think about, oh, the worst case scenario. He just thinks that's gonna be all right, and it was for him. Like it never got to a point where he did feel that overwhelmed, and that did help a bit. But I couldn't really feed off of anyone being normal around me. I was just really stuck in like you guys don't understand. I'm actually feeling like I'm gonna die,
mm.
and that like imminent danger in my head, it felt so real, and I've never had that before because it's not like you see any danger outside. It's just you feel it inside, and it's so true. And like the factor of like what you said, you don't really know over the counter what it was. I did research the company that created those edibles and everything, and it did seem quite legit. And so I do think that's what we end up getting. I just think it was way too strong, and but the biggest takeaway also from it was all of my friends that were in the same situation didn't have as turbulent of a life at that point. So I noticed this was the pattern with you and a lot of people on your interviews, that it usually comes about in a period where everything is chaotic in someone's life, or a lot of stressors are present. And I just came out of a relationship at that point, so I just had a breakup a month prior. Um, I had things going on at home that were kind of subconsciously like a lot on me, that took a toll, and a lot of my life was just changing in general. So I think that was only just like the thing tipping me over. I think maybe a year before or 2 years before, maybe it wouldn't have triggered such a reaction. But I definitely think everything kind of came together and my body just flared up in that way.
Yeah, yeah. Being in a turbulent time in your life can certainly be a factor in in maybe anxiety having built up in the background, and having an experience that maybe kind of tips you over into the experience of DPD or a panic attack. But also, I have spoken to a lot of people who were having good time. They're having a great holiday,
Okay.
and or Yeah. I mean, it's more that like a panic attack can hit you whenever and at any point, you know. You're but you're right. It's probably more likely to hit you if there's like accumulated stresses happening in the background. Um, but yeah, panic attacks are the most common things in the world, and I don't think anyone's exempt from experiencing them. We mentioned a few of them at the start of the interview, Glenn, but can you just tell us a bit more about the symptoms that you
Yeah.
experienced in this time?
Um, yeah, so by far the biggest one, as I mentioned, was the visual symptoms. And I had just a quick tangent on the visual symptoms because I thought about this with another friend. Because he seemed to have similar experience of depersonalization, um, but his symptoms were completely different, just a different set of symptoms. And I do think the symptoms have a lot to do with what happens in the onset of um, the episode or the depersonalization. So for me, the symptoms that I carried around with were a lot of the symptoms I experienced on that day where I took the cannabinoid, and I had these crazy visual symptoms from my trip. A lot of those were kind of still there because I think my brain associated my anxiety and my stress with those visual symptoms, like then reinforcing that. So I did always have this static a vision, almost a bit fizzy and like an old static TV with a bit of a tint on it. And that by far freaked me the most. And I would start wearing sunglasses because of that, because it would remind me constantly of that I have this state. Mental fog was a big thing for me. And I noticed this a lot when I went back to university a couple of weeks after. I had a very hard time just focusing. I usually have a pretty hard time normally as well because I do have ADHD, but um it was way more. Like I couldn't sit there and listen to any coherent thought without drifting off once to about these anxious thoughts, or just thinking in general was very straining because it just everything felt so heavy on my head. And that, like, I would describe that as a fog, but also just like as a blanket over my head, and a weight. And this exhaustion, I would be so tired all day, every day. Even if I slept 10 hours, 12 hours, I would wake up, just go out quickly. And just even going to the city, being overstimulated by the amount of people, and then going back, that would make me so tired. I would have to sleep on the bus. I would always be tired on the way back. And yeah, I think those were the biggest symptoms for me. I did have an elevated heart rate, like every now and then when I got in an more anxious state, but that wasn't too concerning for me. The heart part, it was more the visuals and the brain, or the mind aspect of it. Yeah, I think those were the most present ones.
Okay. And in this time, Glenn, were you speaking to your friends about what had happened and what you were going through, and to your family as well? Were they aware of what was going on?
Yeah, so it was, first of all, like, when I came home, I didn't want to acknowledge it at all for the first day. I was just, everything's going to be fine. But it felt so disingenuous to just sit there in this completely weird state and just try to act normal that it felt impossible. So I had to kind of tell my close circle. So I told my family about what happened and how I feel. And that actually helped a lot, just to create a safe environment where I don't feel like I have to pretend or worry even more. So I just kind of laid that all out, and then I handpicked a couple friends to talk about it um, over the course, just so I could share what I was going through. Especially when I went to uni, I wanted one or two people to know that kind of to share the experience. Otherwise, I always felt like I was alone with this. It would put me back in the space where I would think this is just this unique disease I have and nobody knows about it. And I think that really helped. But I did have to stop talking about it at some point to people because it got repetitive, and it also felt like it didn't do anything for me anymore if I just kept repeating how bad this was and what it was to other people. And so I did limit, but I had to. I would say just to all my closest people. I did say, yeah.
Yeah. And did you say you were speaking to a doctor or therapist at some point as well then?
Yeah, so I did have a therapist already beforehand, and I did bring this up after a bit. And that therapy itself didn't. I think the thing I got, or the best thing that came out of it in therapy was that she was just able to tell me, okay, you're not schizophrenic. Yes. I could tell you if you were schizophrenic, you're not schizophrenic, you're fine. This all makes sense. Just having this reassurance that nothing is imminently wrong with me. She was also, she also went over my reports when I went to the doctor, kind of looked at that together and just to holistically be able to say, rule out everything. Obviously, she also thought nothing would be wrong, but kind of just to be mentally really sure about it, we could just rule out everything and then be like, okay, there's a lot going on in your life. This seems very normal response of your body. And it kind of helped me to hear in therapy a lot of things that would align with what I heard in your book, which that helped me a lot because it would give me confidence in that, okay, I can kind of map out what I'm having here. This is my body's response, and that would give me a lot of comfort. Yeah, so I think therapy can help. I was lucky that I already had someone that kind of knew a bit of my backstory. But if maybe not in the beginning stages where it's all you think about and it would be easier to kind of get your mind off of it a bit. So I don't know, it's very individual if it helps. For me, it did help, but I didn't go plenty of times. I only went, I think, 2 times during this whole period. So I can't really comment on how effective it would be, but it did help me.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good. um, you may have mentioned it already, Glenn, but what was your lowest point in the whole experience? Is there a specific moment or time that sticks with you?
I had a couple that stuck out to me. I think the one that felt the most lost was really in that week where I came back. So I've been having the symptoms for a bit more than a week. I didn't know what exactly it was. I've heard these couple Reddit stories online that they were stuck in this, and it was so overwhelming. I couldn't sleep properly. I was sleeping and I had like all these anxious worries talking almost down on me in my own mind, that I was really thinking I was going insane at that point. Like I thought I was schizophrenic or something. I thought I had accumulated some form of mental illness that I need to now work on for years and years, and I messed up my whole future because of this, and also just like negatively talking about my experience. That didn't help either at that point. I just kept saying, oh, why could I be so dumb to have done this? All this regret. I should have never done this. I regret this so badly. Yeah, I think that was really the worst part because all of that fed into it and made it worse. And a couple other moments were when I went back to uni, and that was where it didn't help that I study biomedicine because I had a bunch of neuroscience courses going, and I would start associating everything with my disease. It was or my condition. I would sit there, we would talk about different brain structures and I would be thinking, oh, maybe this is the one that that is damaged with me now. Or we would talk about I remember this specifically. It was a PTSD study, and they took these mice. Like one of the mice had ADHD and one of the mice didn't, or ADHD-like symptoms, and they triggered it with stressors to a point where they had PTSD or like a flare-up, and then they checked how long it took them to get back to normal. And the one with ADHD, it took like way longer than the normal one. And I was sitting there thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna be that mouse. That it just takes forever to get back to normal. And I would have all these associations and courses about schizophrenia, and I would just read all the symptoms on the slides and be like, this is all me right now. I how do I know? Nobody knows that I'm actually going insane right now. Yeah, it would definitely be all these in general moments where I felt I was alone with it, where I started thinking it was something else than DPDR, and that initial beginning phase where I didn't know what it was. That was the hardest, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. Um, so at what point did your recovery start, Glenn, and what did that feel like?
So I think it was, I can't really remember at what point it started to feel a bit better, but I remember taking positive steps forward initially. Like I think around 2 weeks in, I I had at that point purchased your book. I was listening to that regularly, and especially before going to sleep, and that would just help me already fall asleep without thinking about something else. So I would just think about what I'm hearing from the book. That would get my mind off it. And I think that's when I realized, okay, I need to live my life. That was a big point in your book, to just kind of turn your back to it and walk the other way. So what I did was I would just try to distract myself like with a lot of things. So I started kind of a challenge with myself. I would focus really hard on just getting in shape again. Go to the like do some form of exercise every single day. I would uh, journal every night, because that would kind of free me from some of the thoughts I had. And I would only write positive things. So I would every day at night, I would just take a second to write down everything I'm grateful for. And it was hard at some days. Like some days I I thought I had nothing to be grateful for, but I did come up with some things, and it did shift my perspective on everything, because I was like, okay, I made it through today. Wasn't so bad, was it? I had all these things. And I would force myself to read, because reading would actually trigger me a lot, because I had these visual symptoms. But I would slowly, just even if it was just half a page or a page at night before sleeping, I would just try to read the contents and be calm about it. And I also did Wim Hof breathing techniques before sleeping. Those would really help me kind of just feeling better. It wouldn't alleviate all the symptoms. At first, I was like, maybe this is just going to cure me. But what it did was it put me in a state where I felt more at ease. Even though I still had all the symptoms, anything that would make me feel a bit better, I would just keep doing. And I think that's where it all started, because I just kept adhering to that day by day, doing all these things. And by focusing on that, I almost told myself, I'm sure like at one day I'm gonna be looking at this and be like, oh my God, it's already over. And a big thing for me was the sport aspect, because I think those were the first times I didn't think about it for a while. I remember going to cycling class or being at the gym and just focusing on doing the exercise, because it was so strenuous. I didn't have any space to think about how bad I was doing or what my anxious thoughts were. So I that felt good because I felt normal in those moments, but then I would be back, and I would be like, oh, maybe I'm not normal. But it's like you said in the book, if you can be normal for a couple seconds, then it's all there. You're normal, and that's when it got exciting to me, and it really picked off from there. But it took a while. Like I started all this 2 weeks in, but it was months that it kind of gradually got better, and it wasn't always linear as well. I had whole weeks of setbacks, and I would write this down, and it would be those were also really hard times where it would feel like I'm back at week one. I I thought I could get out of it, but I'm not. And I would write this down, and I would have to have so much faith in that it's got to be better. And I think that's where I played a lot with religious thoughts at that time and about the concept of faith, because I was puzzled, or not puzzled, I was just fascinated by how faith is like the thing that will just take you across that line. Because there was nothing else really that you have to hold on to. If you're in one of those weeks where you fall back, everything symptoms fully flared up, you feel like you're back at square one, everything seems to not be all right. I just place my faith in that context. I place my faith in all the people I heard in your interviews. I place my faith in your book that I can do this. I will be better. Even though it doesn't seem like it, even though nothing makes sense about it. And I did draw a lot of parallels from it with recovering from a breakup, because I thought it's kind of similar how it feels terrible like after it happens and everything, but everybody at some point reaches a time where they just look back and they're like, oh, actually I'm fine. Like it's everything's okay. And I really think it's the same thing with DPDR. And yeah, I just liked having these connections to other things where I could kind of draw motivation from, because I had already gone through that. So that would make it easier for me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting what you say about the recovery not being linear. And this is absolutely true. Because what you're doing essentially is you're changing a habit. You're changing a habit of thought and behavior. And changing any habit is never, ever linear. It's a spectrum. There's ups and downs along the way. We'll temporarily fall back into old habits. Something will have an association with something we encounter that kind of sets off an old train of thought or whatever. That's absolutely fine. It's absolutely natural. What can sometimes trip us up is that because the onset of anxiety and DPDR can feel so sudden. It feels like, okay, well, one day I was fine, and then the next day it was my brain was damaged and I flicked the switch. So what I need to do is find that switch and turn it off again. So I'm going to try something, and I'll go to sleep, and I'll wake up next morning and see has the switch been flicked. But that's not what happened. And that's not a correct way to think about it. When instead you think about it as it's a process, it's changing a habit, and you allow yourself to have those ups and downs along the way, that's what makes the journey much, much easier. Because when you hit those inevitable waves, when you have a day or a couple of days when the anxiety just goes up like that, it's not that's a problem. It isn't. That's part of the recovery process. What makes it a problem is that we expect it to not happen. We think to ourselves, but I'm supposed to be recovered. Why am I having a day where I'm feeling anxiety? It's like, no. You're on the path to recovery, and the path to recovery is ups and downs. It's waves it's the spectrum of anxiety changing over time. But when you can expect that and incorporate that expectation into your recovery journey, it makes the whole thing easier. Because then when you have days where you feel better, you're like, oh my God, it's gone. You don't start celebrating it and start like,
Yeah.
throwing a party. But then 2 days later, when the anxiety goes up a bit, you don't start getting like jumping to the conclusion that, oh, I'm back to square one, or it's, it was never working. It's like, no. What you're experiencing are the normal ups and downs of the recovery process. But contextualizing them as something to be expected makes that journey so much easier. And yeah, it's when you have that knowledge, it equips you to get through that final stage of the recovery process.
100%. Yeah, the oscillations of just going from a worse state to a better state, and like what you said, not celebrating too much when it gets better will also help you just looking at it more objectively. Like, okay, I'm having a good day today, really cool. If I'm not, also cool, because it's all part of the process, and it doesn't change anything of the trajectory.
Yeah, exactly. Because when you celebrate it, even with the best of intentions, what you're telling your brain is that this is important enough to be celebrated. And you're categorizing it inadvertently with the best of intentions, but you're categorizing it as something that is important and worthy of celebration. So that if and when the anxiety comes back up, then it's something that is, if it was worthy of celebration, it's worthy of your frustration. Or what we do is we take the celebration and the frustration away from it, and that tells the brain that this isn't important at all. And it's not important because you're not in danger. Now, if the house is on fire or if you're getting chased by a wild animal, then yes, in that context, it's important and it should be there. But in your day-to-day life, if you're hanging out with your friends, if you're going to university or whatever, this doesn't need to be there. And the way that we communicate that to the brain is by contextualizing it as a point of non-importance, by not celebrating it, by not getting frustrated with it, and by focusing our attention away from it, whether it's there or whether it's not there, it makes no difference,
Yeah, what really helped in that context was the analogy to being beat up outside the front door. So if you leave your house and your home street and you get mugged or you get beat up right at the front door, you're going to be traumatized from that. And then every time you're going to leave the house, you're going to think about this horrible experience you've had, and you're going to be scared, you're going to feel anxious, and you're not going to have the confidence to walk that street the same way you did before. It will take time, repeatedly getting out that door and seeing, oh, there's no danger, I'm good, I'm aware of it. And the same with life. You just live every day and notice, okay, I don't need any of of these worries because nothing actually happened to me.
Yeah. People ask me all the time, is there a point at which you just like when do you realize that you're recovered? Like is there a morning that you wake up and you go, oh my God, it's gone? And for me anyway, it was more that like I was just having mornings where I forgot to think about it at all, and because I had too much happening in my life, and I just gradually forgot about it, and I just stopped caring about it because I had other things to do. I didn't have time to sit down and research DPDR because I was doing a master's degree in film studies, and I was organizing screenings, and I was meeting friends, and I was working, I was playing music and stuff, and how was that aspect of it for you, Glenn? How was did it feel like a kind of a gradual change? Did you actually have any moment where you said to yourself, oh wow, it's actually, I think it's gone, or how was that?
I think there was a large period of a couple months where I didn't even I had so much going on like towards the end of the year, just before I got to England. I was also traveling a lot and just meeting lots of new people and putting myself in all these situations, I really didn't have time to think about any of this. So I, it was more like I would have moments where I remembered or I got some flare ups of some symptoms. So I would go really long periods of not even just forgetting completely that this is even a thing in my life to having some visual symptoms. Maybe I slept really badly, had a bunch of caffeine, and was in a really stimulating place. And then I would have these visual symptoms again, and I'll be like, oh, I remember. But I would handle it way differently, and it would just be like, oh, okay, like I'm having a flare up, I'm noticing this, and then those would all fade away again because I would focus on just living life normally. But I do remember being in England at one point and just going about my day, and I think it was when that's when I actually reached out to you. Um, I was just sitting there and thinking about something, and I noticed I didn't have any visual symptoms, and I was just feeling okay. And I thought, oh, this is actually gone. Like, I don't even remember what this was. So it was exciting for me, but I also, it's not, I didn't even like, I couldn't connect with it. It was this situational, um, and contextual mind frame of where every time I felt okay, I couldn't really connect with the part of me that would not feel okay back then. So I wouldn't even know how bad it was. And every time I did have the flare up, I would kind of view that more than being normal. So it was really hard. It would be hard for me to even say where it actually stopped, but it's definitely just it just gets normal and you'll forget you'll forget about it. I forgot about it. I didn't even know that this was a thing in my year, and it was this huge thing for me. It took up 99% of my brain capacity at points in my last year. So to get to a point where I would just sit there and not even realize the symptoms or what it even means was a huge step for me. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Glenn, how was the DP manual helpful in your recovery?
For me, it was this really good anchor point of whenever I felt overwhelmed with progressing myself. So when like writing down and everything got a bit too much, I would resort back to just listening to the audiobook because it felt like I had someone um, with me that is going through the same thing, just accompanying me through it. I think that's the biggest aspect of it. I didn't repeat it too many times because I felt like after one listen, I got all the important bits out of it. But I did listen to the accompanied audios. I did kind of always bring those up when I had a moment of stress or when I needed to wind down. I was at home. I was like, okay, I need to calm down a bit. I'll just listen to this for a bit, and that would help me a lot. But in the first week, listening to your book was absolutely vital. Like listening to that audiobook definitely gave me so much hope to even just start this journey. That's how it helped a lot.
That's great. I'm so happy to hear it. um, Glenn, a question that people always ask me, and I'm sure you've seen on the interviews before. Now that you've recovered, is getting back to normal really getting back to normal?
Getting back to normal is 100% normal. So um it is even better, honestly, because I learned so much about myself and how my mind works in this context because you learn so many strategies to manage DPDR and how to go about it, how to view it. I think you can really utilize it in any anxious moment or how you react to other things maybe that don't have to be DPDR. So yes, it is 100% normal. I feel like I am myself, but it's even better, I would say. Yeah.
That's great. So good to hear.
I would like to add things though, and I had to add this more recently because I do feel like it's still not this off switch. I think it's like if, let's say, as someone that quit smoking has a cigarette after they were sober for 10 years afterwards, it doesn't mean that they're chain smoking again. And I think it's the same thing with DPDR. If symptoms come back and flare, like I've mentioned last year, when I didn't drank a lot of caffeine, didn't sleep a lot, I would have a bit of a flare up again. And just remnants of these thought patterns or these habits would come up. I think that's completely normal. It will go away just as it did before. It's just something your body has built up. And yeah, so just not to look at it as a switch and now I'm cured. I'm cured forever. Like, may very well be that maybe, I don't know, 10 years down the line I'll have another strong episode, but I'm really not worried about it because I know how to deal with it, and I know what happens with it. I know it's not dangerous to my body and to my health. So I think it's completely fine, and I definitely recommend starting the journey with the book and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you know, i- it's a mistake to think that, like, if someone has any anxiety-based condition, that when you recover from it, that you're never going to experience anxiety again. Like, it's a natural, normal part of the human experience. Most people will experience depersonalization,
Yeah,
derealization briefly at different points in their lives. Most people, it's normal to experience it in the same way that most people will experience muscle tension, heart palpitations. It is normal to experience this briefly from time to time. But what it shouldn't turn into is a constant ongoing feeling, which is depersonalization disorder. So that's what will not happen again. But it's like, if someone's saying it's like someone who develops a fear of heart palpitations and they think they're having a heart attack, which is extremely common with anxiety. And maybe this goes on for a couple of weeks or months, and they're freaking out. They're thinking, I'm going to drop dead or whatever. And then they go to their doctor or to an anxiety specialist, and it is explained to them that no, you're like experiencing heart palpitations from time to time is perfectly natural. The reason it's been happening longer than it should is because you've been obsessing about it and focusing on it. It doesn't mean that you're going to drop dead. It doesn't mean you're having a heart attack. And is a perfectly normal, common, typical symptom of anxiety. That's all, right? Now, when that person leaves and they have that explained to them, does that mean that they're never going to experience heart palpitations again? Like, they probably will from time to time. But now that they are equipped with the understanding of what that means, and it doesn't mean that you're going to drop dead, in the same way that experiencing brief moments of anxiety or brief moments of depersonalization, like most people do, doesn't mean that you're going crazy or that you've flicked a switch in your brain or whatever. It's the understanding that prevents it from becoming an issue again. Experiencing moments of anxiety and stress throughout your life is part of being a human being. It is normal. It's natural. It's to be expected. But it's that normalization of it and understanding of it that takes the power away from the disorder aspect of it. Because the only reason it turned into a disorder in the first place, or into an ongoing condition in the first place, was because of a lack of understanding of what you were experiencing and panicking that this feeling meant that you were going crazy, that you were going to die, that you had damaged your brain or whatever, none of which was happening. But now that you have that knowledge, that is prevented from ever happening again.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Glenn, there's going to be people watching this interview who may be going through something very, very similar to what you went through back when you were in Budapest and in the weeks and months afterwards. If you could speak directly to those people and give them a bit of advice, what would you say to them?
Well, first and foremost, you can 100% get normal. like I am absolutely certain now that I've experienced it myself. Um, and it has solely to do with how you approach things. So I would give as an advice just to reconnect with the things that you love doing in life. So it might be hard at the beginning to even think about those things, but try to just put yourself in a position of where you were before that, what gave you joy, and it might not give you the same joy it did back then, but just try to do those things anyways, and have faith that it will get that it will get better. You won't think about things. Don't. The number one thing is don't isolate yourself and try to live life differently, because that will only make things worse. Try to meet your friends as much as you want to, as much as you can. Try to go out every time, even if it scares you. Go to that trip that you wanted to do, even if it feels impossible to do. You're gonna be totally fine. If you want to fly somewhere, visit a new city, do you want to go to a concert, an event, a festival, even maybe, all those things you should definitely do, and they will only help you. They will not make things worse. Worst thing that can happen is a flare up, and just make sure um, you have people around you that know you, and also trusting yourself that you have the tools, which you will definitely do. If you're watching this video, you're you're already well on the right journey to get all the positive thought patterns back and keep yourself busy. I think that's a big thing, because thinking about it will only grow it and not help anyone. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
that's
that's
great. That's great advice, Glenn. And just one last question. So as somebody studying biomedicine and going into like potentially specializing in neurobiology, is can you see yourself ever doing kind of any research on depersonalization in future, trying to get maybe a better kind of physiological understanding of it? Is this something that would potentially interest you in future?
I definitely have played with the thought, especially as it was more apparent, or more of a concern to me last year. I definitely did want to spend more time on that. I don't have any particular goal that I want to figure this out, or I want to figure that out, but I could definitely see myself doing some research on this, because I do think the whole just anxiety in general is a very interesting mechanism of our brain and our body, and so many things, trauma related anxiety, and like situational anxiety when it comes to being exposed to danger, actual danger, or danger in form of, like I experienced it through something taken up, a drug or an edible. And there's just so many ways that anxiety controls our behavior, and I think that's really interesting. So I could definitely see myself doing research in that regard, because I do feel like there is a lack of the crossover of kind of what conventional medicine and conventional biology uh, does in terms of research when it comes to the brain, especially, and kind of the psychological aspect, like um, psychiatric, or more psychological approaches, and even bring in kind of these both of these ideas. So you did this a bit in your book, and I think that really helped kind of attaching this mechanism to our fight or flight system, and how we use this as an alarm system, and this is a normal mechanism of the human body, kind of trying to understand anxiety as something that is very human, but also connecting it to the thoughts coming from it, because sometimes it's very abstract for people to grasp, how a negative thought about myself could be attached to something like that. And I think there's a lot of interesting things to discover there. So yeah, I will definitely let you know if I do go down that line.
Do please, yeah, yeah. I mean, I personally find it absolutely fascinating, and also I think the idea of somebody studying biomedicine and neurobiology who has personally gone through it themselves. I mean, that's such an interesting perspective, such an interesting take on it. So if you decide to pursue that at all in future, Glenn, and you're more than welcome back on the channel anytime to share your findings or to discuss it. I know I'd be fascinated to have you back on, and I know there'd be a lot of people watching the channel who would love to hear that perspective as well. Um, but in the meantime, Glenn, it's been so lovely to speak with you. Thank you for
Thank
taking
you.
the time to come on the channel and to share your perspective. And I know there's people going to be watching this who will find it extremely inspirational and helpful. So yeah, thank you again. It's been lovely to speak with you, man. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. And thank you for the book. That helped me a lot. It's been a pleasure for me to get to share at least some of the insights I've had. As I said in the beginning, it was really important to me to kind of full circle this experience by just giving back to the people that also helped me. So yeah.
That's great, man. So happy to have had you on the channel. Okay, all the best with your work and your research, and take care of yourself.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much. Okay, bye.